Hello dear students, today we are going to start class 10th history chapter 4 the making of a global world part 1. Students, according to NCERT this is our fourth chapter, but it is our third chapter because we have opted it as a third chapter. The making of a global world. Students, in this part we will cover introduction, the pre-modern world, Silk routes link the world, food travels, spaghetti and potato, conquest, disease and trade. Students, the chapter is the making of a global world. In this chapter we will see the process of globalization. We will see the history of a global world. So first of all, there is need to know what is globalization so that we can understand the main theme of the chapter. Students, globalization means the speed up of movements and exchanges of human beings, goods and services, capital, technologies or cultural practices all over the planet. One of the effects of globalization is that it promotes and increases interactions between different regions and populations around the globe. Students, globalization connects the countries. It is the interconnection between the countries for different purposes, sometimes for trade. People, they search work, the movement of capital, cultural practices, exchange of technologies. For different purposes, globalization takes place. So basically, globalization is interconnection between the countries for different purposes. It is a rapid interconnection between the countries. Because of globalization, different countries are interconnected with each other for different purposes. Students, an official definition of globalization by World Health Organization, we will see here. Globalization is defined in a different way. So let us see the definition according to WHO. Globalization or increased interconnectedness and interdependence of peoples and countries is generally understood to include into interrelated elements the opening of international borders to increasingly fast flows of goods, services, finance, people and ideas, and the change in institutions and policies at national and international levels that facilitate or promote such flows. Globalization has the potential for both positive and negative effects on development and health. Students, globalization increase the interconnection between the countries, between the people. It is the exchange of goods, services, finance, people's ideas. It also affects the institutions and policies at national and international levels, as WHO is also one of the international organization. Globalization has the potential for both positive and negative effects on development and health. Students, when we are globally connected to each other, when we exchange the goods and services, sometimes we exchange the materialistic things, the tangible things, but sometimes intangible things are also exchanged among us. Non materialistic things are also exchanged by the people, like disease that affects the health of the people. So, one side it is having positive aspect, on the other side it is having negative aspects. On the basis of some issues, we can say it is very much helpful in the development. On the other basis, we can say that it is harmful also. So it is beneficial as well as harmful also for the people. Students, as I told you, the chapter is the making of a global world. It means in this chapter we will see the process of a globalization. As everything is having history, so we will see the history of globalization, how today's world became a global world. Students, as history always talks about the past, we will see in the past what kind of situations were there of globalization, how it started. In earlier phase, what was the situation of globalization? We will talk here about the pre-modern world. Students, when we talk about globalization, we often refer to an economic system that has emerged since last 50 years or so. But as you will see in this chapter, the making of the global world has a long history. Of trade, of migration, of people in search of work, the movement of capital, and much else. As we think about the dramatic and visible signs of global interconnectedness in our lives today, we need to understand the phases through which this world is which we live has emerged. Students, here we will compare the modern world with the pre-modern world. The pre-modern world is a time before the modern world, the earlier time than the modern world. We will see that how the people they were engaged in globalization, what was the process they adopted, how they were doing the globalization. Because the past time was different than the present. Today's the globalization is very fast. We are having different technologies. But earlier time it was very difficult. To cover a short distance, people they were taking a lot of time. But nowadays, very fast we can cover the distances. So nowadays, the globalization process is easier than the earlier time. Because today's technology is developed, we are having different techniques to go somewhere. So today's world is converted into a village. If we have to go America, we have to go in different countries, England or somewhere else we have to go. We can cover that distance in a short time. So we can say today's world is like a village. Students, travelers, traders, priests, and pilgrims traveled vast distances in search of knowledge, opportunity, and spiritual fulfillment or to escape persecution that carried articles, values, and skills, even including diseases. Students, as if we will see on the economic front, we will see the trade, exchange of goods, services, technologies. But on the other hand, we will see that from ancient times, travelers, traders, priests, and pilgrims traveled vast distances for knowledge, opportunity, and spiritual fulfillment, or to escape persecution. Persecution, that is hostility and ill treatment. Because of that, they were escaping and they were moving to different countries to make them safe because of political or religious factors. So, not only globalization is related to exchange of goods, services, technologies, for other purposes also people are engaged in globalization. Sometimes they travel vast distances for knowledge, opportunity, and fulfillment of and spiritual fulfillment. Sometimes people they go to visit different places for adventure, for getting some new ideas, for religious purpose. So along with economic benefit, people they travel to different places to get spiritual fulfillment, knowledge. The Harappan people used coastal regions for the sea trade as early as 3000 BC. They traded with Mesopotamia, and for centuries cowries or seashells from the Maldives were used as form of currency between China and East Africa. Students, as early as 3000 BC, it should be BCE, an active coastal trade linked the Indus Valley civilization with present day West Asia. For more than millennia, cowries, the Hindi kauri or seashells, used as a form of currency because there were no availability of money at that time. So people they were using cowries or seashells at the place of currency. From Maldives found their way to China and East Africa. The long distance spread of disease carrying germs may be traced as far back as the 7th century. By the 13th century, it had become an unmistakable link. So, as the countries were connected for the economic purpose, but they exchanged the germs, diseases also exchanged along with human beings. India's global link was firmly established by the 13th century. Silk routes link the world. Students, the Silk routes linked the world. The Silk Route was a network of trade route which connected the east and west and was central to the economic, cultural, political, and religious interactions between these regions from 2nd century BC to 18th century. Students, the Silk routes are a good example of vibrant pre-modern trade and cultural links between distant parts of the world. The name Silk Routes points to the importance of westbound Chinese silk cargoes along this route. Historians have identified several silk routes over land and by sea, knitting together vast regions of Asia and linking Asia with Europe and Northern Africa. They are known to have existed since before the Christian era and thrive almost till the 15th century, but Chinese pottery also traveled the same route, as did textiles and spices from India and Southeast Asia. In return, precious metals, gold and silver, flowed from Europe to Asia. Students, silk routes were the routes those were connecting the countries with each other for the trade. It included the routes of land and sea. They were mostly connecting the Asian countries with European and Northern Africa. These are the ancient trade routes. China was also connected with this route, as China was giving pottery and India was giving textile, spices to different countries. In return, precious metals, gold and silver flowed from Europe to Asia. Asian countries were receiving precious metals, gold and silver. So in this way, from ancient time, with the help of silk routes, the countries were connected to each other. They were doing the exchange of goods through these routes. Students, trade and cultural exchange always went hand in hand. Early Christian missionaries almost certainly traveled this route to Asia. Not only exchange of goods were taking place through this route, along with goods, ideas were also traveling. Religions were also traveling. Christian missionaries almost certainly traveled this route to Asia. In our country, different religions came, missionaries came, Muslim preachers, they also came. Much before all this, Buddhism emerged from eastern India and spread in several directions through increasing points on the Silk routes. Students, as Buddhism originated in our country, but because of globalization, it spread in the whole world. Different countries, they became the followers of Buddhism. Some of the countries, their national religion is Buddhism. Totally, they are Buddhist countries. Sri Lanka is one of the good example of a Buddhist country. So, silk routes were the routes, ancient routes, those were connecting the different countries. Basically, Asian countries and Europe and Northern Africa were connected to each other with the help of silk routes. They were doing exchange of goods. Cultural exchanges were also taking place through this route. Food travels, spaghetti and potato. Students, as food offers many examples of long distance cultural exchange. traders and travelers introduced new crops to the lands they traveled. Students, as we talked about, the exchange of goods and services between the countries, along with goods, food is also traveling with the people because food is indispensable part of our life. We can't leave food. Even we have to cover short distances, we take or pack the food with us. So, food is the product which is traveling along with the human beings. Because human beings carry the materialistic things. Along with materialistic things, their food culture, their religion, their language is also traveling with them. So, students, here we are talking about the food travels. Along with the human beings, food is also traveling. Students, as traders and travelers, they were taking the finished products with them and they were moving to different countries for trade. They were taking foodstuffs with them. As they were moving to different countries, they were spreading their food culture there, and in return, they were taking the food culture of that country where they visited. So, in this way, we can see the exchange of food culture. As we have seen, traders and travelers introduced new crops to the land they traveled. Even ready foodstuffs in distant parts of the world might share common origin. Take spaghetti and noodles. It is believed that noodles traveled west from China to become spaghetti. Sometimes it is a confusion to see the origin of the product. If we will take spaghetti and noodles, it is believed that noodles traveled west from China to become spaghetti. As the food is also traveling, its name is changed. Some people they think that China is the origin of noodles and later it became spaghetti. Or perhaps Arab traders took pasta to 5th century Sicily, an island now in Italy. Similar foods were also known in India and Japan, so the truth about their origins may never be known. As noodles, the same products are seen in India and Japan, so it is very difficult to know the main origin of the product. Yet such guesswork suggests the possibilities of long distance culture contact even in the pre-modern world. So students, food is another way to understand how a global world existed in pre-modern times since traders or travelers introduced new food to the people they visited 5 centuries ago. Indians were not aware of potatoes, soya, groundnuts, maize, tomatoes, chilies, and sweet potatoes. Students, many of our common foods such as potatoes, soya, groundnuts, maize, tomatoes, chilies, sweet potatoes, and so on were not known to our ancestors until about 5 centuries ago. Students, many of the things in present time we are using, those were not known earlier. It was introduced by outsiders. The origin is not our country. The products today we are using in our day-to-day life, but origin is outside. These became our common food we are using, that is potatoes, tomatoes, chili. Commonly everyone is using in our country. These foods were only introduced in Europe and Asia after Christopher Columbus accidentally discovered the vast continent that would later become known as America. So these foods were introduced in Europe and Asia after the discovery of America. And America was discovered by Christopher Columbus. Accidentally, he discovered the vast continent. Students, here we will use America to describe North America, South America, and the Caribbean. Sometimes the new crops could make difference between life and death. Europe's poor began to eat better and live longer with the introduction of the humble potato. People, they became dependent on this crop, that is potato. Ireland's protest Ireland's poorest peasants became so dependent on potatoes that when disease destroyed the potato crop in the mid 1840s, hundreds of thousands died of starvation. As students, they became so dependent on potato that they were not growing other crops, mainly they were growing potato, and because of the destruction of the crop, many of the people, they faced starvation. They died because of starvation. Students, as we talked about the origin of noodles or spaghettis, we have also seen that new crops were introduced in different continents, just like potatoes, soya, groundnuts, maize, tomatoes, chilies, sweet potatoes, and so on. Different kind of crops were introduced in different regions. Students, sometimes the new crops could make the difference between life and death. Here we will discuss something more about the Irish potato famine that occurred in Ireland. By the 1800s, the potato had become the staple crop in the poorest regions. Students, for the Irish, the potato was the majority of their diet. Mostly they were using potato in their diet. The Irish ate potatoes every day at every meal. The more rural family, the more they dependent on potatoes for sustenance, because the landowners from England generally only rented out poor bogland, that is marshy or wetland, for the native Irish, because in these areas potatoes were often the only food crops that could be grown. So in this way, in rural areas, people mostly they were growing potato and they were mostly dependent on potatoes. Ireland's poorest peasants became so dependent on potatoes that when disease destroyed potato crop in the mid 1840s, student, that disease was destroyed both the leaves and edible roots or tubers of the potato plants. In that disease, there was a great destruction to the potatoes. Because of this, in the mid 1840s, hundreds of thousands deaths were called the Irish potato famine. Students, the Irish famine was the worst to occur in Europe in 19th century. So students, as the new crops, on one side it was beneficial to the people, they got new crops, they started using those crops, but on the other side we have seen as the Irish people, they became so dependent on potato crops, and because of the disease, the crops destroyed, the people, they started facing starvation. Because of that, hundreds of thousands died, and it resulted the famine in Ireland because of potato. Conquest, disease and trade. In the 16th century, after European sailors found a sea route to Asia, they discovered America. The Indian subcontinent had been known for bustling trade with goods, people, customs, and knowledge. It was a cultural point in the trade network. It was a crucial point in the trade network. After the discovery of America, its vast lands and abundant crops and minerals began to transform trade and lives everywhere. Students, the pre-modern world shrank greatly in the 16th century after European sailors found a sea route to Asia and also successfully crossed the Western Ocean to America. For centuries before, the Indian Ocean had known a bustling trade with goods, people, knowledge, custom, etc., crisscrossing its waters. The Indian subcontinent was central to those flows and crucial points in their network. The entry of Europeans helped expand or redirect some of these flows towards Europe. Students, as Indian Ocean was helpful in the trade, it was a very busy area because in ancient time the people, they were using sea routes for exchange of goods and services. The Indian continent was central to these flows and crucial point to their network, as India is in strategic position which can connect different countries to it. So it was connected to different countries, whether European countries or African countries, it was connected. So after the discovery of America, its vast lands and abundant crops and minerals began to transform trade and lives everywhere. After the discovery of America, it also entered in the international trade because it was having abundant minerals and crops. So it began to transform trade and lives everywhere. Students, precious metals, particularly silver, from mines located in present-day Peru and Mexico, also enhanced Europe's wealth and financed its trade with Asia. Legends spread in 17th century Europe about South America's fabled wealth. Many expeditions, many expeditions set off in search of El Dorado, the fabled city of gold. Students, there was a rumor that there is a city of gold, and people they were doing search for that because it was thought that there is a city where a lot of gold is there. So people they were searching that place. But really that place is there or not, no one knows. Students, the Portuguese and Spanish conquest and colonization of America was underway. The most powerful weapon of Spanish conquerors was not a conventional military weapon but germs of smallpox, it should be pox, POX, which they carried. America's origin inhabitants had no immunity against such type of diseases. Students, as we talked that along with human beings, germs are also traveling. Now in present, we are facing different kind of germs which is also traveling with the human beings. Just you will see presently the current example of coronavirus. It is spreading from country to country. Same as in earlier time also diseases were traveling along with the human beings. Let us see the effect of these germs, how they changed the lives of the people, the politics. The Portuguese and Spanish conquest and colonization of America was decisively underway by the mid 16th century. European conquest was not just a result of superior firepower. In fact, the most powerful weapon of the Spanish conquerors was not a conventional military weapon at all. It was the germs, such as those of smallpox, as they carried on their persons. Because of their long isolation, America's original inhabitants had no immunity against these diseases that came from Europe. As the Spanish soldiers, they were having germs on their body, they spread that disease in America, and America was ignorant about these diseases. People were not having immunity against these diseases that came from Europe. Smallpox is in particular proved deadly killer. Once introduced, it spread deep into the continent, ahead even of any European reaching there. It killed and decimated whole communities, paving way for conquest. Students' guns could be bought or captured and turned against the invaders, but diseases as a smallpox to which the conquerors mostly immune. Students, until the 19th century, poverty and hunger were common in Europe. Cities were crowded and deadly diseases were widespread. Religious conflicts were common and religious dissenters were persecuted. At that time, to oppose it was a big crime. But dissenters are the people who refuses to accept established beliefs and practices. So dissenters They were persecuted. Thousands therefore fled Europe for America, that is to escape from persecution. As in the beginning of the chapter, we have seen that because of globalization, the dissenters, they were escaping from the persecution. Hereby, the 18th century plantation worked by slaves captured in Africa and were growing cotton and sugar for European markets. Because of globalization, the workers were also exchanged. They were also taken to different places, that is to grow cotton and sugar for European markets. Basically, African people were taken to the different places. Until well into the 18th century, China and India were among the world's richest countries. They were also preeminent in Asian trade. However, from the 15th century, China is said to have restricted overseas contacts and retreated into isolation. China's reduced role and rising importance of the America gradually moved the center of world trade westwards. Europe now emerged as the center of world trade. So earlier China was having a good reputation in the international market, but later it was replaced by European countries and they became the center of world trade. Now in the last, test your progress. Students, some questions are given here. Try to answer these questions, that is to check your understanding. Show how the Silk routes are good examples of pre-modern trade between different countries of the world. What was the most powerful weapon that the Spanish used to conquer America? How did food travel from one country to another? Give some examples.